Hi, I'm Don Gray. Welcome to Artist and Critic. Today we're going to be taking a look at part 2 of the Vatican exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which will continue there through June 12th. It is a very interesting exhibition. There are works of obviously outstanding significance, both in terms of their aesthetics, in terms of their artistic and emotional content, and in terms of their spiritual content. Much of it has to do with Christian themes, which are rather out of fashion, to say the least, in our century and in our time, both artistically and socially. There are works from antiquity, and there are contemporary works which most people, I think, would see as being the weakest part of the exhibition. Contemporary artists, whether they're painting Christian subject matter or not, I find it very difficult to envision any of them in the 20th century standing up with the likes of Fra Angelico, Raphael. Of course, Michelangelo is not here, but he's represented back in the Vatican, of course. And great painters like Caravaggio, whose deposition we'll see shortly. I'd like to open the program with a brief reprise of the 3 sculptures in the exhibition that we are discussing. The Belvedere torso, in its rough, expressive majesty, seems to express something timeless of mankind, something timeless in our aspirations, something timeless in our problems, our struggles. And perhaps it is this blend of timeless fear and hope, as well as its majestic physical proportions despite the damage of the centuries, that has made it a favorite with artists from Michelangelo, presumably through the present. I definitely see Rodin's thinker in this. Of course, Rodin was deeply influenced by Michelangelo, so if indeed Rodin wasn't particularly affected by this, perhaps we see him through his love of Michelangelo. The timeless luminousness of this piece seems somehow more enduring than the Apollo Belvedere exhibited also at the Vatican show at the Metropolitan. This, a Roman copy of a Greek work, perhaps suffers from that fact. Roman sculpture, Roman copies of Greek sculptures. When we know Greek sculptures through Roman copies, we always feel deprived that we're not seeing the real thing, that we're seeing it through Roman eyes, which are considerably different than Greek, obviously. This work, as well as the Belvedere torso, would stem roughly from the period of the Hellenistic period in Greek sculpture, when the work followed several currents. In this instance, one of ultra refinement, some might say over refinement, over elegance, toward a more emotionalized realism in the Belvedere torso, which relates somewhat to the Laocoon group. This elegance could refer to, I suppose, the somewhat otherworldly attitude of Apollo, the Greek god, but it seems that it perhaps reflects a little bit more of a Roman sense of of world domination without really profound spiritual values. Comparing this elegance and refinement and effeminacy, really, to a more masculine, though somewhat idealized, generalized conception of the leader in this over life-size sculpture of Roman Emperor Caesar Augustus. We see him gesturing, addressing, announcing with that hand of command poised on his right foot, weight off the left, and down beneath him that tiny little figure, maybe we can just barely see it, to the left rear is a cupid, a thwart, a dolphin, both symbols of Venus, the goddess of love, and perhaps in a stretch of patriotic fervor and imagination, Caesar Augustus's line of ancestry was traced back that far to the level of mythological gods. One can imagine that it was good press and good publicity, but maybe we look at it now with a little bit of disbelief. An Angel by Melozzo da Forlì, music-making angels, fragments of fresco from an Ascension of Christ, painted roughly in 1480. We can sense the irregular area of the plaster work cut out. This angel has a sense of seriousness and rather striking personal intensity in the gaze of the eyes and the linkage that we make with the personality. A certain rhythmic convolution of drapery adds a certain element of emotional presence to the work. It's not dynamically Baroque by any means, but there's an uncommon intensity to it. Compare this angel with the companion piece by da Forlì, and we think that we see Jean Harlow reborn, or somebody from a box of raisins in the 1920s. There's an uncommon, almost prettified loveliness in this blonde creature. We can imagine the artist searching out Italian streets and coming upon this lovely vision and saying, this one has to be an angel. In the original, it's almost too strikingly, almost gaudily beautiful. But who are we to quibble with beauty? I guess I am. Well publicized has been this immense tapestry based upon a cartoon or study by Raphael, done in the 1515 area, meant to hang on the walls of the Sistine Chapel. Apparently his contribution, several of them, not just this one piece, his contribution to the competition with Michelangelo. The subject of this particular tapestry is the miraculous draught of fishes, and we see Peter, one of the figures, in that striking reverse triangular pyramid in the left with their arms reaching down to the sea. It's richly colored, hanging on the wall by itself in a gallery, as I recall, with simply the Belvedere Apollo and the Belvedere torso. They make a striking triumvirate. One wonders sometimes how much of Raphael is in a work like this. After all, he simply did the cartoon. He didn't execute the tapestry. It is the work of artisans or artists. Perhaps you remember the article in the Times on the exhibition discussing nuns eagerly and fastidiously at work restoring the piece, putting in new silver threads and so forth, and which also brings to question the mind, how real an object is this? How much of 1515 Raphael and the contributing artisans is still there? As in, we could ask the question about any work in the Vatican exhibition or any museum exhibition as far as that goes around the world. Where does restoration stop? In that Times article, perhaps you recall, there was a photograph of a painting on an easel and the restorer eagerly at work painting away on it. Just knowing human nature, we realize the editorial impulse is strong in all of us. You know, nothing's right until we put our hand to it, whether Raphael did it, Rembrandt, or Michelangelo. And cases of overzealous restoration are too numerous and painful to mention. But this particular piece is at least estimating 20 feet square and an impressive for size and richness of thought and symbolism, as well as color and design. Here is a detail of the fisherman. One can see the influence of Michelangelo in Raphael's muscular figures. Leonardo da Vinci's St. Jerome, unfinished. The golden underpainting, again, rather colorless in a sense. We see pictures like this are always extremely interesting to look at, simply from the point of view of giving us insight into the working methods of artists. And we see Da Vinci working essentially first with shape relationships and shape delineation. Clearly the lion in the lower right-hand corner, as we continue to pan down, is the least developed element of the two main characters. And you know, moving from flat shape delineation, then slowly adding lights and darks to build form, and then gradually moving toward the application of color in glazes and that kind of process. St. Jerome, an expression of almost skull-like suffering, retreated to the desert to find his depth of spiritual vision fulfilled, translating the Bible in the desert, but taking his beloved Cicero with him, a little bit of the worldly world of antiquity, which he condemned himself for as being sinful. We see the sense of struggle in the man, of yearning in the man, the outreach of the arm, the pull of the head against the arm, and the lion snarling in the foreground, symbolizing not only the fact of his desert environment, but the fact that Jerome is attempting to subdue the animal within him, the lust of the flesh, not just sensual lust, but limitations of any kind, whether anger or envy, greed. And so the lion lies down at the feet of St. Jerome, controlled by the saint, if you will, the wonderful arabesque of the lion's tail echoing the extended arm, and the arabesque created from the sweep of the arm through those knotty, gnarly neck tendons and collarbones to the flowing down the curve of the drapery. We sense Da Vinci's own feelings in life, his own desire for perfection, perhaps. When he dies in the king's arms, he laments his failing of having lived up to his potential, of having failed to accomplish what he should have accomplished, which is perhaps the pinnacle of the perfectionist self-condemnation. Can you imagine someone accomplishing that much in his lifetime in a variety of fields and then feeling that he'd let himself and God down by what he'd done? Rather unbelievable. In my humble opinion, the masterpiece of the exhibition is Caravaggio's Deposition in 1604. This painting alone, if that's all that had been brought from the Vatican, and all the other halls of the Metropolitan were empty, this jewel, this magnificence would have made the visit worthwhile. I heard some woman in passing speak to her companion in a somewhat plaintive voice. They don't paint pictures like this anymore. No, they don't, unfortunately. We have fallen so far, our artistic efforts are so pathetic compared to a work like this. And of course, so many artists today will try to get out under escape the onus of comparison by saying comparisons are odious, invalid. But that's the only way we learn. That's the way we see what we've accomplished. That's the way we see whether we're failing in life and art, we're just stirring up more muck and mud, browning the water of life and understanding, or whether we're making a significant addition. Caravaggio's work is a mammoth achievement in size, perhaps 9 feet tall, I'm estimating. Two, four, six, seven figures. 6 figures, excuse me. I can talk about art, I can't add. It's so solid, so three-dimensional, so strikingly rich in color. The reds, the greens, the oranges, the blues, the body of Christ in the original, surprisingly yellow, adding a significant chromatic note to the picture. The powerful chiaroscuro, the contrasts of light and dark that in themselves are passionate and dramatic and build three-dimensional form to the utmost. No painting in the show can stand up to this one in terms of its beauty and its power of aesthetics and its depth of spiritual and emotional content. In a moment we'll see the huge Poussin martyrdom of St. Erasmus, which hangs directly across from it. It's even bigger than the Caravaggio. But all the crowds of people stand about the Caravaggio, admiring it. There's an eddy of people around the fringes, this hard knot group of people looking at it. And across the way, the Poussin pales in terms of its contrasts of color, and there are few people looking at it as much of a masterwork as it is. In terms of the composition of the Caravaggio, there's a cascading movement from top right, curving over to the left and down through the hands and heads, through Christ's hands, down through his arm, into the blackness of the tomb, the lid of which his hand intersects, as does his winding cloth. It's almost as if a spiritual or divine comet had fallen from the firmament and plunges into the depths of eternal night. The grief of the people is genuine. Their postures, bearing the body weight, are genuine. The head just above Christ's head, the hair seems almost pasted sweatily to the forehead. The gnome-like, orange-clad man to the right center seems almost a hunchback, certainly hunched under the burden of the Christ figure. His face, that of a common laborer, which Caravaggio so carefully sought out in many of his models and was criticized by the more effete artists and patrons of the day for painting ugliness. But we see what Caravaggio has painted is truth and reality. He's made the death of Christ not only a transcendent spiritual event, but an encompassing, enveloping human event. The figure in the upper right-hand corner raises her hands in grief, her eyes blinded though uplifted in despair rather than any prescience of resurrection. The resurrection is not spoken of in this instance. And we might see this perhaps in a broader societal sense, a diminution of man's relationship to God. The painting is hung high on the wall in the museum, and one would like to, as a painter, to get one's nose into it, to examine the application of the paint, which is at once rich and free, layers of glazing that create the transparency and richness of color and the intensity of form. It's an incomparable painting. Obviously, I'm recommending it highly. Let's compare it, though. Keep in mind the drama of lights and darks, and we go to Nicolas Poussin's painting, The Martyrdom of Saint Erasmus, painted in 1629. This hangs directly across from the Caravaggio, and we close in on Saint Erasmus being eviscerated by the Romans, his intestines being taken out and wound upon a drum, because he will not worship the Roman God. If we pan up, we see the figure on the left who could either be pointing toward the angels, which are waiting for Erasmus' soul to take him home to God, or he could be pointing to the statue of Hercules on the upper right, whom St. Erasmus has refused to worship, and his refusal the cause of his martyrdom. So that we're witnessing in a powerful composition, powerful interaction, overlapping of figures, a testimony, a testament of human spiritual belief, the profundity and extent to which it will go, seeking to worship that which is eternal rather than that which is temporary, contemporary, and simply convenient. Interestingly, a series by Donato Creti, Astronomical Observations from the year 1711, exploring the Sun, Moon, Saturn, Venus, Mars, and Mercury, seems to amplify the theme of Caravaggio's deposition, the removal of mankind from heaven and God in a deeply personal, personified relationship, which is replaced by a scientific, astronomical, observatory relationship. There is a mood of mystery and human relationship to the earth and heavens, to the nighttime setting. Let's send us through the series of these pictures. They're far from masterpieces, but they are genuine, and they have a genuine feeling, and they seem genuinely expressive of both the mystery of these orbs and planets as celestial objects, and in that sense, a feeling of mystery and the mystical that one can align with God and a spiritual experience, but one also feels, as we've said, the presence of science. Man seeking, in a way, through darkness, to move through darkness toward understanding. And we see the figures not only pointing and discussing, in some instances using telescopes, but charting, drawing, writing, note-taking, discussing. But the nighttime setting and the feeling of mystery is far from making this a totally rationalistic endeavor. The modern section, unfortunately, does fall short, and we close with the vision of Carlo Cara's Daughters of Lot, Otto Dix's Christ and Veronica, which at least has some intensity and honesty of feeling, if aesthetically it can't measure up to the past, and the maquette or study, perhaps 10, 12 feet high, of a chapel window, Tree of Life by Matisse, which in its 20th century simplicity and modernity speaks more of the poverty-stricken aesthetically and spiritually than anything else. You've been looking at Artist and Critic, a brief review, two-part review of the Vatican show at the Metropolitan. I'm Don Gray. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.